I'm a little old-fashioned, so I don't have any PowerPoint slides, so forgive me. Thank you so much for having me here today. So Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous country, but it is experiencing a rapid growth in demand for assisted reproductive technologies, or ART, and in vitro fertilization, or IVF in particular. Indonesia has the largest Muslim population in the world at 205 million, with the vast majority ascribing to the Sunni tradition of Islam. While studies of ART in other countries abound, very little information about ART in Indonesia exists. This presentation aims to include Indonesia in the ongoing international discussion about ART by providing an overview of how religion influences Indonesian ART policy. Infertility clinic policies are grounded on both the views of the country's powerful Islamic coalition and those of the worldwide Islamic community. Absent a shift in religious mores and a rapid reduction in poverty and inequality, Indonesia will need to adopt creative means to make ART both more available and less necessary as a solution to infertility. This country-specific analysis of the laws and customs surrounding ART reveals that strategies to reduce infertility must be tailored to a country's unique religious and economic climate. This research is based on Indonesian language anthropological studies, conference proceedings, medical school faculty recommendations, online texts and news articles, and religious department theses and faculty publications from Indonesian universities. It also includes my interviews with two fertility physicians at Permata Hati Infertility Clinic in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Islam has a profound effect on Indonesian law through fatwas, or legal opinions, issued by the Indonesian Council of Ulama, or MUI in Indonesian acronyms, the national coalition of all major Indonesian Muslim groups, and through election of Islamic political parties. The MUI can issue fatwas that do not have the force of law, but remain highly influential in the legislative process. Consequently, almost all of the regulations about who can use ART and which procedures are practiced in Indonesia align with major Islamic religious rulings on the topic, despite Indonesia's status as a nominally secular independent republic. Islam also pervades Indonesian law and policy through a process that Indonesian political scientist Anies Baswedan terms political Islam. That is, even without Sharia as a basis for the Indonesian state, Islamic political parties and organizations have recognized their ability to fulfill an Islamist agenda through the election of Muslims to government positions. Moreover, the central Indonesian government has often failed to prohibit geographic regions of the state from implementing Sharia law. With the development of assisted reproductive technologies, Islamic religious communities worldwide have had to develop new recommendations and issue fatwas on the moral standings of certain procedures. Most Islamic interpretations of ART consider the general practice to be acceptable and often required in the face of infertility. In keeping with the emphasis on family, marriage, and procreation found in the Quran, Sunnah, and Hadith, Indonesia has also embraced ART that makes reproduction possible for more couples. Despite the strong support of ART from within Islam, it can only be used within the context of an ongoing heterosexual marriage in Indonesia. Homosexual couples cannot access ART since most Islamic scholars interpret the Quran as condemning homosexual partnerships. In accordance with these interpretations, ART is legal in Indonesia for married heterosexual couples. Article 127 of Indonesia's Health Law number 36 bars single women, unmarried couples, and homosexual couples from using ART. With the exception of Iran and Lebanon, predominantly Shiite Muslim states that allow leading religious authorities, marja, to practice individual religious reasoning, or ijtihad, and have officially embraced gamete donation after Ayatollah Khomeini's 1999 fatwa, most Islamic countries see third-party donation as a threat to the sacred marriage contract and to the ideal of pure lineage demanded by Islam. In accordance with international and Indonesian Islamic fatwas, Indonesian law implicitly prohibits donation or selling of egg or sperm for the use of ART. And although there is no explicit prohibition against the practice, clinics refuse to engage in third-party donation. The MUI has openly condemned the practice of sperm donation in a fatwa issued in 1979, invoking similar reasons given in other Muslim states for banning third-party gamete donation, such as concerns that the introduction of outside gametes is tantamount to adultery, that it threatens pure lineage, and that the child could face social condemnation. Consistent with the dominant beliefs about surrogacy in Islam, surrogacy is prohibited in Indonesia by statute. Iran and Lebanon are the only Islamic states that allow surrogacy, again under Ayatollah Khomeini's 1999 fatwa, with the remaining countries citing reasons to prohibit surrogacy that are similar to the arguments against sperm and egg donation. In Indonesia, the practice is implicitly forbidden under Article 127 of Health Law number 36. The MUI has similarly banned surrogacy, stating that the practice is, quote, forbidden because this will lead to complicated problems with regard to heritage, end quote. Because IVF is not covered by insurance in Indonesia for the half of the population that actually has health insurance, many couples would find it to be more cost-effective to implant multiple embryos into a woman during one cycle. However, despite the expense of IVF in Indonesia, Indonesian Ministry of Health guidelines have mandated an upper limit of 4 embryos that can be transferred per cycle. Interestingly, most clinics in Indonesia place further restrictions on the number of embryos implanted per cycle of IVF, choosing to transfer only 1 or 2 as part of an informal clinic policy. Physicians at the Permata Hati Infertility Clinic in Yogyakarta base their policy in part on concerns about the ethical permissibility and clinical safety of selective abortions, which may be needed in the event that all 3 or 4 embryos successfully implant in the woman. Unfortunately, this limitation places an additional burden on couples who find even one cycle of IVF prohibitively expensive. Indonesia's prohibition of egg, sperm, and embryo donation and surrogacy reduces the number of men and women who can have children through ART and exacerbates the burden of infertility in the country. Prohibiting the use of donor gametes and surrogacy limits the effectiveness of ART procedures and restricts the number and types of couples who can achieve pregnancy through ART. Moreover, Indonesia's position on sperm, egg, and embryo donation and surrogacy has ramifications for homosexual couples and unmarried individuals in particular. That being said, it's unlikely that Indonesia will reform its policies on egg, sperm, and embryo donation and surrogacy, given the dominant belief within Sunni Islam of the impermissibility of the practice. However, these beliefs are not necessarily a foregone conclusion in Islam broadly, as evidenced by Iran and Lebanon's support for third-party donation and surrogacy after the 1999 fatwa permitting these practices. As Abbasi Shavazi et al. Explain, the practice of ijtihad among leading religious scholars in Iran and Lebanon's Shia Islamic communities, quote, has allowed a certain flexibility and pragmatism toward new technological developments, including IVF. Sunni Islam, in contrast, is characterized more by a literal understanding of religious texts than by personal interpretation of scripture, which has led the Sunni community to ban gamete donation. Without a similar shift in dominant Sunni thought away from literalism and towards ijtihad among religious leaders, it is unlikely that Indonesia will change its position on third-party donation. Importantly, as anthropologist Marcia Inhorn notes, even in Iran, where third-party donation is officially endorsed, a number of Shiite religious authorities disagree with Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwa and continue to adhere to the Sunni prohibition against not only sperm donation, but also embryo and egg donation, and by extension, surrogacy. Third-party gamete donation and surrogacy continue to be controversial practices within both the Shiite and Sunni societies. Finally, it is unlikely that Indonesia would turn to Shia Islam as a source of legal code, given the active persecution of minority Shia Muslims in Indonesia and the labeling of their faith by MUI leaders as, quote, heretical. Given the evidence suggesting the powerful influence of existing Sunni doctrine on cultural beliefs, even if Indonesian Sunni scholars were to issue a fatwa supporting third-party donation and surrogacy, it's unclear at this time whether the public would accept it. More importantly, Indonesia's beliefs about third-party donation and surrogacy and about single women and homosexual couples that are affected by these bans are deeply held religious convictions, and as such, it is important for the rest of the world to respect Indonesia's right to hold these opinions about the proper structure of a family unit and the ethical permissibility of new medical technologies. While a shift to allow these policies would enable more couples to have children and permit single women and homosexual couples to create a family, it may not be the place of outside observers to impose these changes or recommend them to Indonesian society. Nevertheless, there are several intermediate options that would allow more infertile couples in Indonesia to obtain ART without taking resources away from already minimal healthcare dollars and that work within the country's religious norms. One attractive alternative recommended by the World Health Organization is to develop low-cost methods of ART that are frequently overlooked in developing countries. For example, expensive ovarian stimulant drugs could be foregone in favor of natural cycle IVF, where no hormonal stimulants are used. Clinics could also attempt vaginal culture, in which oocytes are fertilized inside a capsule that is inserted into the female patient, thus eliminating the need for an incubator. The Indonesian government could also address infertility by bolstering programs that focus on preventing infertility from the start. Since most of Indonesia's infertility is caused by pelvic infections resulting from sexually transmitted infections, promoting STI awareness and treatment at government clinics could help considerably with reducing levels of infertility. Indonesia can incorporate STI education and treatment into its already popular family planning movement, focusing in particular on condom usage. The country should also consider STI surveillance, education about STIs in schools and among sex workers, and better training for physicians in how to recognize and manage these infections. The full impact of such reforms would be difficult to predict. This case study of Indonesia reveals that religious norms and economic pressures can shape the clinical practice of ART to a greater extent than formal legislation. Indonesia's legislation on ART provides no explicit prohibition against third-party donation, yet all clinics in Indonesia refuse to practice egg and sperm donation. Moreover, fertility clinics have developed their own ART policies, such as limiting embryo transfers to only 1 or 2 embryos per cycle, that reflect Islamic norms rather than government legislation. Recognizing that Indonesian religious values shape ART clinical practice more effectively than do formal laws reveals that reforming ART policy may demand more than simply creating new legislation. Religious attitudes must shift organically to allow practices such as third-party donation and homosexual or unmarried parenthood. Before these long-term religious and economic shifts take place, however, there is much that Indonesia can do to improve overall access to ART and to ensure more equitable distribution of services. By developing cheaper methods of ART and promoting STI prevention and detection, Indonesia can begin to reduce the prevalence of infertility within its borders. Thank you.